Hi, welcome to this edition of Ask the Aquarist, sponsored by the Dauphin Island Sea Labs Estuarium. My name is Brian, I'm the curator here at the aquarium, and today we're going to talk about Alabama's snakes and the incredible diversity that we have here in the state. First, a little introduction about snakes. Snakes are reptiles. They have scales, they have long cylindrical bodies, and they lack external ears, they lack limbs, and they lack eyelids. So you won't find any snakes winking at you. So snakes are incredibly diverse around the state. We've got 44 species in the state, and only 6 of those are venomous. So the majority of snakes that you'll encounter are not venomous. Now a little bit about the size of snakes in the state. The smallest snake in the state of Alabama is the southeastern crowned snake. Full grown, it's about 6 or 7 inches. It weighs less than a quarter. Very tiny snake. On the other end of the spectrum, the longest snake in the state is the eastern indigo snake, and they can be over 8.5 feet long. Now most of them don't reach that size, but 8.5 feet is taller than the tip of my finger reaches from my feet. So it's quite a long snake. They're not super big around, so the heaviest snake in the state is actually the eastern diamondback rattlesnake. They don't get nearly as long, maxing out around 7 feet, but they can weigh about 30 pounds. So a really robust, heavy-bodied snake. So wide variety of sizes in snakes. A couple of really cool snakes we have here on display at the estuarium. We've got the corn snake, which is also known as the red rat snake. And these guys are really good at camouflaging for their defense in the woods. You can see their coloration. It would blend in really well with leaves that have fallen on the ground. These guys are really gentle by nature, and they love to eat rodents. So they're a really important snake to have around. One neat thing about them that I didn't mention earlier is snakes, unlike lizards, have these long, skinny tongues that are forked at the end, and they use those to smell. So they smell for danger, trying to figure out what the heck are we doing. They also, in the wild, they will sniff for prey, and they'll also sniff for partners. So they use those very complex sensory organs inside their mouth with the tongue to be able to smell what's going on in their world. I think he likes the limelight. All right, another neat snake that we have here at the estuarium is the banded water snake. And these guys are often confused with water moccasins or cottonmouths. They live in the same habitat. They have similar coloration, but there are some things that are quite different about them. It is important when you're learning to identify snakes not to rely on any one specific characteristic, because that can get you into trouble. Many snakes have greatly different colors depending on how old they are, different colorations depending on what part of the state they live in. But this guy is a probably 2-3 years old young guy, and he is a fish and frog eater, but he also likes rodents. But another really important snake to have around. Snakes can be found from in the ground. There are snakes that burrow into the ground, like the worm snake, the earth snake, and there are also snakes that live in the trees. The rough green snake likes to climb trees and hunt. You can also find snakes in really, really wet habitats. So many of the water snakes, the Gulf salt marsh snake that we find here along the coastline, are primarily in the water most of their life. Other snakes are quite at home in dry habitats, and they actually get moisture from the food that they eat. So the eastern coachwhip snake is a snake that's perfectly happy in very dry habitats. So the habitats where they live, there's a wide variety. You can also look at different ways that they protect or give birth to their young. Some snakes will lay eggs, and some give live births. So it's split about half and half with the species we have here in the state. The ones that lay eggs, many will just lay eggs in a rotting stump and just let the babies hatch and develop on their own. Some snakes, like the eastern mud snake, will actually lay the eggs and then wrap around them to protect them from predators until they hatch, and then the babies go on their way. Of the snakes that give live birth, many of them give birth and the babies disperse and go to survive on their own. But there are some, like the pit vipers, the rattlesnakes, where the mom actually stays with the babies stay with the mom, and she protects them until their first shed, until they've grown enough to the point where they shed their skin and go about their way hunting on their own. There's no nutrition provided to the young like a mammal nursing their young, but there's a lot of protection in some of those snakes. So another feature about snakes that shows a lot of diversity is what they eat. There are snakes that specialize, and there are snakes that are very generalist. They don't really care. They're not very particular in what they eat. But all snakes are carnivores. There are no herbivorous snakes in the world. So in the state of Alabama, we have snakes that specialize on eating spiders and insects, like the rough green snake. They like to climb those trees and hunt spiders and insects. Some snakes specialize on eating big salamanders. The salamander can be this big, and an eastern mud snake will gobble it up and maybe eat 3 or 4 a year, and he's happy. Some snakes specialize in eating toads, like the hognose snakes. Toads have a fancy defense mechanism of their own. They will puff up with air, sort of like a pufferfish, to protect themselves and make them hard to swallow. But the hognose snakes have a way around that. They have fangs in the back of their mouth. They can actually puncture that balloon of the toad to be able to swallow it. So some pretty impressive specialization going on there. And many other snakes are generalists. Like I said, the rattlesnakes, the rat snakes. Some rat snakes will eat birds, bird eggs, rats, frogs. So they're not very picky at all. In addition to diet showing us how snakes are diverse, we also look at defense mechanisms. Snakes have many different ways to protect themselves, and it's a bit of a misnomer that snakes are aggressive. There's really technically not any aggressive snakes. Some of them do defend themselves vigorously, and there's a fine line there, but I think it's important to recognize that these snakes are not coming after us to hurt us. If we back them into a corner, if we're trying to grab them, or if we accidentally step on them, they don't know it's an accident. They just want to defend themselves. So some snakes do bite as a way to defend themselves. Other less intrusive ways of defense, many snakes rely on camouflage, and that is a very good way to defend themselves. If they're curled up in the leaves in the forest, they might blend right in like a corn snake. Other defense mechanisms, there's one snake that is very comical in the way it does. It's the hognose snake. They have a multi-tiered defense mechanism. First, they will bluff. They act big and bad. They'll rise up off the bottom, they flare their head out, they puff up their body with air, and they try to look big and scary. And if that doesn't work to scare off the would-be predator, the snake will then switch gears and he plays dead. He'll flop to the ground, roll upside down, stick his tongue out, and produce this smell of death. It's a type of musk, and tries to fool the predator into thinking he's some rotting piece of meat on the ground. So it's funny enough that you can actually, as a person, flip these snakes over right side up, and they will immediately flip back over. So it's pretty funny. I'm sure it's not funny to them. They're really stressed out, but it just exemplifies how diverse these snakes are and how amazing they are with adaptations. So another neat animal, another neat reptile that's often confused with snakes is the eastern glass lizard. Now, I'd said that snakes don't have limbs, and that's how you tell them from lizards. Well, there's an exception to the limb rule. This eastern glass lizard is legless. It has no legs. Let's see if we can get him to come to the surface here. He likes to hide under the bark. These guys are really neat. They don't have legs. They have external ear holes like other lizards, and they have eyelids. So if you get a chance to look at one really closely, you might see him blinking. Let's see if he'll cooperate here. Get a closer look at him. Very pretty lizard. And they like to live in sandy soils where they burrow into the ground, and they like to eat crickets and worms. The bigger ones might eat small mice, but Very interesting reptile that's often confused with snakes. I hope that I conveyed a little bit of excitement about these snakes. There's a little bit of misconception about them. They're a very important part of our ecosystem. They help regulate rodent populations, and rodents are actually, over the centuries, known to be some of the worst vectors of pathogens for humans. So it's important to have these natural controls in the system. If you encounter a snake in the wild, it's best to just observe it from a distance and let it go on its way, or take a wide path around it. The vast majority of people who get bit by snakes are bit by the snake because they're messing with them. So just don't mess with them. If you happen to have a snake that's in your yard and you don't want it to be there, the best advice is really to spray it with a water hose. It will likely go on its way. They don't want to mess with us, so if we just make it unpleasant for them, they'll carry on their way. And there are some agencies, there's actually a group of volunteers around the state of Alabama that will come and relocate snakes out of your house if you have one there and you don't want it to be there. These people are kind enough to donate their time and efforts because they value the lives of the snakes and the benefit that they provide for our ecosystem. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with this video with questions you can email to ask@disl.edu. And we'll be happy to respond to those questions. There are also some really good resources you can find online. There's some great Facebook groups where very knowledgeable people respond very quickly. If you want to know those, email that question to us and we'll pass those links on to you. Also, there's some really good books if you want to go old school. We have the classic Reptiles and Amphibians of Alabama, and then the new and updated Lizards and Snakes of Alabama. So these are both great books to have on the shelf. They're full of good pictures and great information. So we appreciate your interest, and stay tuned for our next installment of Ask the Aquarist.